Inversion.
Aim it and pull the trigger. You're not shooting the bullet, you're catching it.
Doing visual effects on a Nolan film I imagine, is different from the majority of big budget Hollywood films with a lot of visual effects in, because his approach is very much about finding ways to film practical elements. There's obviously a lot of questions immediately about how we're going to achieve images of events, half of which are inverted in time and half of which are moving forward. Having worked with Chris before, I know that the first approach is going to be, what can we perform backwards at the same time as performing forwards in the same shot, actors and stunt people in the frame. Largely we're performing in reverse and being either the whole shot being reversed or as it was normally. Wherever possible, we wanted to find ways of filming real components and mixing it up a little bit so that they felt very real and grounded in the real world, but still had that sort of slightly odd kind of, it wasn't just a case of filming forwards things and reversing them. There was more to it than that, more interesting and more complicated. A really good example is, where we have cars pulling away quickly and they're an inverted car, you would expect the wheels to spin and throw some dust or gravel out backwards. What we did for those, we found a way of dragging a car backwards while its wheels were spinning forward, so it threw dirt out backwards, but it was going the wrong direction. So then we inverted the whole thing. So the car pulled away, sucking dust into the back of the wheel. So that was a really good example of the sort of approach where we find a practical real world event and then just sort of turn it on its head a little bit so that it felt real but wrong.
How would you like to die?
Old.
You chose the wrong profession.
The car chase scene where there are forwards and reverse cars and forwards and reverse people in those cars, the audience see this whole event, and then a little while later we see it all again, but this time the audience is seeing it from the reverse point of view. All the same events. So the challenge for us was to work out exactly how they interact, the forwards and the backwards components interact, to make sure that they made logical sense in both directions.
You want to crash a plane, but not from the air. No, it's so dramatic. Well, how big a plane? That part is a little dramatic.
For me, the goal is always for the audience to not know how something's been done, whether it's, practical, real, CG. I mean, the audience shouldn't be really aware of that. The plane crashing into a building. Talking to people since the film came out, everyone assumes that is largely CG, or must be, components of that must be CG. But in reality, that was actually achieved as a practical event where we used a full-size real plane and built a set and towed the plane into the set, and all of the pyro explosions and everything is in the shot for real. There were visual effects involved in that we had to clean up the tow ropes and we added jet blasts to the engines and CG trees to be blown around. But really the vast majority of the chunk of that shot was in camera. And so it's kind of turning it on its head again a little bit, in that people assume that it is CG, but it isn't, or that some major components of it were CG. The end scene in the film obviously contains a lot of big explosion events, and there's a combination of forwards and backwards explosions at the same time. And obviously you can't train an explosion to be backwards, so we had to add one half of that shot. So whenever there's a combination of two things, one of them has been added. So we certainly did that a lot for the sequence where there's a minefield of people and trucks running up and down a hill with mines going off. And we used a combination of practical shot filmed elements, but also CG explosions, which had to incidentally match exactly the practical ones because they were right next to each other. Another major event in the end battle scene where a building is simultaneously blown up by inverted group of people and a normal group of people. So it's simultaneously exploding and imploding. So we built two large, or they were 1/3 scale 10-story buildings, two matching buildings, and we filmed each of them from a matching camera angle, and we blew one up at the top and one at the bottom, and then we could reverse the film and composite the two together, reverse one of the films and composite the two together. So this building had this sort of simultaneous exploding and imploding event.
This reversing the flow of time doesn't us being here now mean it never happened.